Hello, and thank you so much for joining for a special ISACA Live This Cybersecurity Careers Week. I'm John Brandt, Director of Professional Practices and Innovation here at ISACA, and I'm here with cybersecurity recruiter and career coach Jeff Combs, who runs J Combs Search Advisors. We're calling this conversation Ask a Cybersecurity Recruiter Live. It's your opportunity to get answers to cybersecurity career-related questions. Jeff, I'd like to give you a little bit of background for our viewers.
Thank you. So background on me, I have been recruiting for 25 years in information security, cybersecurity, risk and audit. I started my career with a specialized boutique firm, Alta Associates. And since then, I have been on the agency side as a headhunter. I worked internally with corporate organizations like Hewlett-Packard and Estee Lauder as part of their internal TA organizations. And I've been a consultant helping CISOs and leaders build their teams in hybrid capacities. So this has given me a pretty broad perspective on hiring across the industry, and I'm looking forward to sharing it.
Well, our viewers are really in for a treat today. I had an opportunity to talk to Jeff before we started recording here today. I'm super excited on his perspective and how it's going to reinforce or potentially challenge some of the things that we have in our state of cyber report. So we asked you in advance for questions, which we're going to start with today, but we encourage you to put more questions in chat and we'll answer them as we can. We have people joining from all over the world, so if you would drop it in the chat there where you're tuning in from. Let's get started. So Jeff, we're going to start with the easy question here. A little softball. How would you describe the cybersecurity job market today?
Well, I'm not going to lie, it's pretty tough right now, and I think most of us realize that. The market is always cyclical. And I think we've been in the bottom of a down cycle for the last couple of years, given the number of layoffs across tech and security in general. So it's pretty tough. There's a lot of people on the market. There are fewer roles available. And the practices that companies use to recruit people are not very transparent and are creating a lot of FUD and and confusion in people. So, but that said, everything is cyclical. I'm starting to see signs of starting to pick up again, and now's the time to retool ourselves, get ready, and prepare for what's coming in the next couple of years.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, when we talk about the applicant pool, for our viewers, if you hadn't had an opportunity to look at our State of Cyber 2024 report, always encourage people to go look at that because there's a lot of information. But there's a lot of criticality and skepticism about the applicants. So from your perspective, having worked with the applicants, talking to the hiring managers, right, doing field decision, right, and informing that, what changes have you seen in the applicant pools in the last couple of years?
Well, the applicant pool, it's constantly evolving, and there's definitely more interest, people coming in from other industries. There's more feeder programs with degrees, certifications, et cetera, to break into the industry. But overall, the applicant pool really runs the gamut from very experienced leaders to people that are just starting out. And the challenges that many of the roles that companies are requiring for are very specific in what they're looking for. So it doesn't necessarily support the broader community of professionals right now that have skill sets across different domains.
That's an interesting point that you brought up there, because when we talk about the cycles that have happened in the profession, as far back as I can remember too, we've seen these ebbs and flows of the generalist versus the specialist, right? And so what I think I just heard here is that at least for the work, those that you're serving here, the roles appear to be more specialized at this point in time.
Yeah, let me back up just a little bit on tell you my perspective on what's happening behind the scenes within talent acquisition organizations, because it's really informative of what's going on. So I have been internally with a number of TA orgs. I've come in as a specialist to help build out teams within security. And what a lot of people may not realize is that with the layoffs and techs that have been occurring across various industry, domains and industries, the first people that go are the internal recruiters and talent acquisition teams. So now we're in a market where, in many cases, the people that are on the other side receiving your information, your applications, they're either reduced to a skeleton crew, In many cases, they're very early career because often the people that stay are the ones with the lower salaries and compensation. And there's traditionally been very little training and investment in supporting TA teams because it seems to be such a transactional role that companies often, it spin it up when they need it and drop it. So many applicants are struggling to get attention because the people on the other side that are receiving their information, their applications, don't have the understanding and the experience to know what they're looking at. They want to do a great job, but they essentially don't have the power and the professional gravitas to take your resumes or things and move them up the chain. So what that means is that while there are many people applying to jobs, the interface on the other side is limited in what it consumes and process. And to some degree, that means that it's more important for everyone that is applying to roles, when you talk about generalist versus specialist, is to move away from the generalist approach and really focus on the skills and specific requirements that companies are hiring for in that position. And it's because largely, when you have a resume that really shows the breadth and scope of your possibilities, it requires somebody to read that and interpret what your strengths are. We don't have that luxury now. The people on the other end can't interpret that. They don't have the domain expertise. So it's more important than ever for people that are, pursuing job opportunities to tailor their resumes and their presentations so that, in effect, they're leading the witness and giving that person exactly what they are looking to see so that they can feel confident in moving you to the next level.
That's interesting, right? So we talk about, you're providing a little view from up underneath the hood here. So if you've got younger talent acquisition teams, so everything you described makes a lot of sense to me, and it helps kind of explain some of what I believe are lags and how long it takes positions to get filled. But by the same token, then, isn't it fair that just because the talent acquisition teams are younger, what's that relationship that they have with the actual hiring managers?
Good question. And, it's not necessarily youth, but inexperience too, we should say, because, talent acquisition is off a field that has a very low barrier to entry, and very few people are crazy enough to stay in it as long as I have. Land of misfit toy stuff. But to answer your question, well, can you repeat the question? What was your specific question again?
So with the inexperienced talent acquisition within the internal to an organization, right? If they have any, because maybe it's just a single
one or two. Yeah.
Right. Maybe it's an HR person who's got a collateral duty. But at the end of the day, the hiring managers, the people that are staffing these, they're still capable, they're still experienced. So what's that relationship between an inexperienced talent or TA and that hiring manager?
I actually do a lot of mentoring and coaching for TA on that subject alone. There's a traditional power imbalance there, in the sense that oftentimes people come in and TA are seen as order takers or processors and often aren't valued as somebody who can be a talent advisor. And that's a skill and a reputation that you have to build and earn. So the disconnect often is one that we have TA people that lack confidence or domain expertise to really go forward and promote candidates and really drive that dialogue. And many times too, we have hiring managers hiring managers are individuals. They run the gamut. I worked for extremely talented, capable hiring managers, and I worked for absolute nightmares. So there's a lot incumbent on hiring managers and leaders to really think about the way that they approach their relationships with TA. And not to go too off on a tangent, but a recent talk that I gave on CSO hiring playbook at ISACA in Atlanta earlier this year really comes down to that if you're a hiring manager, it's incumbent upon you to build that relationship with your TA and to find that person that wants to be a part of it, develop them, make them realize that they are in fact a part of the security organization and are critical in developing it, and give them that sense of pride and investment so that they ultimately become agents of influence within TA for your organization.
That makes a lot of sense. No, I have a greater appreciation for it. When you talk about the better ones and the nightmares, I think I haven't really had I have not personally experienced the TA that was really driving the talent pool, right? They're casting a big net, and I find myself like scratch my head, like, how did this actually get to my desk? But
Well, when as a hybrid, so it's an old reference, but it still checks out. I've been called the Mr. Wolf of Pulp Fiction for CISOs who want to build their team. They need a fixer. They need somebody who can come in and be that interface between TA, their hiring leaders, and the talent. And it's a real circle there. So, I have found that whenever I was able to find that one TA person that had a bit of idealism or wanted to be a part of something bigger than just their job, they were the prime candidate to become the cybersecurity expert embed in TA. And when you give somebody opportunities to take on new things and grow and be a part of something bigger than themselves, it's really amazing what can happen. And I'm proud to say that some of those people are rock stars now because they just needed somebody to say, hey, you can do this. Here's how you talk to these people. Here's what they need. Let's set this up. And then you ultimately can step into a role of power as an advisor to these people. And that relationship with hiring managers and a strong connected TA will create momentum and a flywheel effect that will do things far beyond anyone thought possible.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you for that perspective. So, when we were talking about the generalists versus the specialists here, what skills are you seeing in highest demand from hiring managers, both from a technical or from the soft skills / human skills perspective?
Well, if we look at, we're talking about hiring specialists now, a lot of the roles that are being recruited for now are either backfills from people that left, whether through RIF or other reasons, were retracted out. And they're often very mission critical roles that are tied to meeting audit requirements or project deadlines and things like that. So the usual suspects that tend to always be in demand in security are application and product security, identity and access management, cloud security stuff, and anything that's really related to solving critical problems. So, while in a broader market where there's a lot more hiring and we're building out teams and programs, there are roles that have softer skills that are broader skill sets that are really necessary. But now when everybody's essentially paring down to the minimum, they're really hiring people that can help them solve the critical problems, which essentially comes down to what are the leadership team accountable for. So budget prioritization is going on critical hires, and there's not as much focus on building out teams for people to grow into and expand new functions right now.
Okay, so what's the role in communication skills? Like, year after year, our surveys netted that soft skills always trumps the technical skills. Now that's come down some, and we've seen some shuffling on the technical skills, which really makes a lot of sense if we saw what happened with the pandemic and then post-pandemic, and then now with the explosion of AI, right, in that intersection between security and privacy, where data is just key to it all. But at the end of the day, to your point is, if you're looking to advance strategy, if you're looking to, evolve how it is you do things, you need to be able to communicate and understand your customer, which is the business leaders at the end of the day. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking in the last question about what's always kind of in demand, especially in the leaner markets. But if you really think about security's role, and all the different functions across the different domains within it, we're to a large degree, there's a lot of uncertainty about what we do and why we're there. It's like, so I think that more than ever, and it's going to continually increase, people that in security that are going to be engaging with others, whether they be in project risk teams or audit teams or engineering, they need to understand how to communicate in a consultative manner. And there's entire playbooks to do that. It's how do you engage with people in a way that, one, puts them at ease, creates trust and connection, and aligns problem-solving abilities. So I think that it's always the case that the better you are at understanding others' issues and balancing them with your own priorities, and then communicating that in which a way that shows that there is a partnership or there's an opportunity for wins, That's going to be one of the key distinguishing factors. And those are skills that take time to develop. They come through working with people and understanding. In a lot of my individual coaching, we work on ways to essentially negotiate and engage in conversations so that you're drawing people out and you are not coming in as the stick, shutting people down. So to answer your original question, I mean, regardless of how technically deep you are or where your specialty is, our role in security comes with a lot of questions and need to clarify. So the better you are at articulating what's going on, why and how it's relevant and how it can help, the more you're able to teach people what your role is, and it strengthens the position and the culture from security across the entire organization.
Very good. Yeah, I'd also add that with that, where we talk about, this need to get newer to the profession people in there, somebody has to train and mentor them, because there is no, like, for the work that we do is so variable based on enterprise conditions. Like, no, every enterprise has got unique requirements, different tools, different this, that, and the other. So that culture that you talk about is very empowering, right?
Well, and we are facing a social challenge as far as we're dealing with social media addiction, app uses, et cetera. Our attention spans in general are becoming more fragmented. And I don't like to cast too broad a net on this, but I get a lot of feedback that some of the early career people coming in, Gen Z, there are the things that clearly differentiate the ones that are really going to stand out versus the ones that aren't, are the ability to communicate, engage, talk, and not being afraid to ask questions or look foolish in that process. I think that one of the challenges I've heard is that many people that have kind of grown up in the current era in education, they have a lot of intellectual knowledge, but they have a limited ability of interacting with people or solving real-time problems. So a lot of my coaching for early career people is to help them. How do you engage with people? How do you have the confidence to ask questions and position yourself as somebody who's a part of the solution versus part of the problem?
It's interesting, the points you just made take me back a few years ago. I did a master's program in workforce ed. And as part of that, I did a research project on this piece that ultimately it went back to, and I looked at particularly how STEM came about. Like, because we want to point back and say STEM's this panacea, it's going to solve a lot of things. But if we look at how that was ever integrated, it really wasn't. It was bolted on. And we so there's parallels within the security market, because our early days, we just tried bolting security onto tech stuff.
Yeah.
And that didn't work at all. So we're seeing the same thing. And it's like, and so now you look at like all the stuff with the generative AI tools and how it can help, but ultimately they become these easy buttons, the life hacks. And there's no the why you're doing it, adding the context. I'm skeptical about what's going to happen on the heels of this, right? Because when we look at AI in particular, we've gone from a point where we know we've had this, this widely reported, we've got a shortage of people to fill these positions. Which still exists, but to a lesser degree, right? And it's variable, to which you've been talking about. But then a lot of people, there's a lot of promise, there's a lot of hype around AI. And at the end of the day, our ability to discern and validate machine outputs has never been more important. And when we talk about, the attention to detail and some of the feedback you're hearing, it validates some that, when we have these conversations, like, we need to be very measured as we move forward and not just think that technology alone is going to solve all of our challenges.
No, I would agree. And I think that as the industry and the profession expands, there's room for a lot more people to come in many ways. But I think one of the disservices that is being done to many people that want to enter the field is the promise of this new exciting field where if you finish your degree or you go through this boot camp or you get this specific certification, you're guaranteed an entry point into $100,000 a year career path. And I honestly, I think it's criminal. I think it's heartbreaking too, because there are many people that are looking for an opportunity to bank on themselves and invest in themselves, and they believe that this could be it, and they do, and we're not there to catch them on the other side. So, and a lot of that is because the core aspects of this field, I simplify it by saying, like, you have to think of security as we are the immune system to a much larger host organism. And as an immune system, we have to innately understand the systems that we are protecting and healing and all that stuff. You can't become an immune system until you fully, deeply understand those elements. So, there's no shortage for people that do systems administration, network administration, set up labs, go through all these different new opportunities for learning where they gain practical knowledge of the systems that they ultimately will be responsible for defending and protecting. There's no shortcut to that. I'm sorry. I mean, if you really are invested in a technical career path, you've got to dig the foundation, and that means getting dirty and learning those hard skills. Now, that said, that's not everyone's aptitude, and that isn't the only path. But, the bottom line is the best people in security that have the meatiest roles, that have the most influence, are those that built a very solid foundation of understanding and technical skills. Whether they have them now or not doesn't even matter. It's understanding the foundational systems to a level of clarity and depth that allow you to have those insights and create value when it comes to solving security-related problems.
And, and what you're speaking to there is the passion that's associated with it too, right? Because there's only so many hours in the day. And when you consider that the cybersecurity function is this protection-oriented body, right? Because you're what you're talking about, and I love your analogy there, but there's only so many hours of the day, and when you're playing whack-a-mole with an increasingly dynamic threat landscape, it's unreasonable for you to be able to carve out consistently hours each day for your own professional growth. Like there has to be a level of effort on the backside of that, and which I think is where we're going to have some challenges with the different generations that are in the workforce, because they have some stark views on that and protecting their time versus maybe not.
Yeah, that's an interesting challenge. And I think part of it's maturity and experience too. I mean, to be good at anything, there's a certain amount of sacrifice and investment that comes into it. And I think the old saying that play now, pay later, pay now, play later applies here. And I think it's true of any profession. It's not just ours. I think if you're serious and you have a passion for it, there's something about you that strikes your innate curiosity, that's a real strong indicator that it's a field worth pursuing. And it gives you the ability to pursue the difficult problems and learn and invest things. So I think that, one of the frustrations I mentioned earlier is that it's seen as a quick path to success. And that's not true. We all know that's not true. I mean, nothing worth doing is easy, and we're not solving simple problems in audit, risk, and security. So there's no substitution for getting your hands dirty as early as you can, digging ditches, gutting it out. And when it comes to protecting time, I mean, I get it and I appreciate that. But there's also a lot to be said for setting aside your comfort and doing things that are hard and things that are uncomfortable, because that's what builds our capacity to do more. So like we'd all like to just cruise in and work for a few hours and like surf Reddit or whatever, but the truth is, the more you spend time gutting it out and doing the hard things, the stronger you become and the bigger the platform you build to grow from.
Yeah, that's a great point there. Your capacity to do hard things there is a correlation to the ability to do more and larger hard things. Boy, we're just covering a whole lot of ground on this right now. So a few minutes ago, you had touched on degrees. So I love this question, and I love this talking point. because the data points to an interesting situation out there. So ISACA research has highlighted mixed feelings on university degrees for years now and across the globe. And within different regions within the globe, there's been some interesting trends up and down or whatnot. What are you hearing from those you serve, though?
Well, I got to say, excuse me, I'm agnostic and I'm pragmatic about it. And, as a headhunter, I've been called a craven flesh peddler by one of my best friends, but he's just busting my chops. But, really, you got to think about what we're doing. Like, companies pay us pretty high fees, and they're looking for people in the top 20% of the field, essentially. So you really have to be able to differentiate, what is real and what isn't. So coming back to the question of degrees, I think, first of all, I have a degree in fine arts and painting, which should tell you something about why I became a headhunter, but that's another story. I see degrees and any investment in one's educational professional as valuable. However, you have to be discerning. So say you want to go get a degree in cybersecurity. Is that bad or good? It's neither. It's how you go about it. If you choose an institution that has a strong network, that's great. You can leverage that. But ultimately, the coursework is not going to be enough for most roles. You have to have some deep personal investment or curiosity. So when I started headhunting, the term cybersecurity literally did not exist. Cyber was a science fiction word, right? And we eventually brought it in. So most of the people that were doing security at the beginning were really from the island of misfit toys. They were pure security people tend to be asymmetrical creative thinkers. There's a huge number of artists, mathematicians, linguists, did I say musicians? People that are creative and people that don't like taking things at face value. Some people that I could name, but I won't, that are like on the Mount Rushmore of security, started off hacking video games when they were in school to be a brain surgeon, or it was that one person where it's hitting the fan and they're like, we don't know what to do. Can you look at this? And the one weird person that never quite fit and is like, oh yeah, I got this. Now, I'm over-characterizing degree, but I think it brings back the fact that it really comes down to you have to like it. You have to give a damn. It has to be something there more than, I'm going to get a good job and pay my mortgage and have a nice car. I don't want to be overly idealistic, but there still is a significant calling component to people in security and risk who are really good and go the furthest.
I'm glad you spoke on that last piece of it, but because the epiphany I've had of late was, if you look at our research reporting, and for a couple of years now, it's probably the most damning statistic in there is when survey respondents were asked to rate criticality of certain soft skills within the organization, honesty always falls at the bottom, right? Honesty and empathy are right there. So, so I'm extremely bothered by that. And it's not to say that the other ones aren't important, because even attention to detail falls down at 5, which blows my mind. But to your point is about the calling. And this is where I think, and maybe it's a little idealistic in some regards, but the world thrives and actually cannot operate without technology anymore, right? Whether it's it's internet connectivity and electricity, you can't get money, you can't pump gas, you can't pay bills, you name it, the number of things. And so no longer should we be viewing this about protecting a company's intellectual property, which I'm not saying isn't important, because it is, but the world by which we live in is pretty fragile. And so the mindset needs to be more protection oriented and almost more like what we would see on a, security, law enforcement, first responder type thing. because you're driven then by the mission instead of some of the other things. You said, listen, if you're good at what you do, the money's going to come, especially in this profession. You can make a name for yourself and whatnot, but it does feel like we're selling the wrong benefits nowadays. And I think it's just something that we all have a responsibility to kind of internalize and maybe self-reflect a little bit, because I don't need to tell our listeners, you don't need to tell those of you serve, that how disruptive it is when there's a breach, how disruptive it is when there's a misconfiguration, how disruptive it is when name the source of any cyber incident that's happening right now. And with this trend that we're on of basically centralizing the internet, to which it was never intended to be, now it ups the ante to protect those key functions or those key providers that really keep trains moving.
Yeah, I would agree. I will say, though, that you mentioned honesty, integrity being seen as low value. How did you phrase that? What was that?
So when survey respondents were asked to rate the importance of these soft skills, it rated down towards the bottom there. And
I mean, come on, that's bullshit. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, I mean, honesty for honesty's sake in a corporate setting, that can get you in trouble, right? But integrity, I mean, if we're at a point where we're saying that integrity is a low value asset, then we're talking about a much bigger cultural problem. Integrity ultimately is core to what we do in this field. And because ultimately, we need to hold ourselves individually accountable. And you mentioned something about, the word that popped into my mind is standards. And that's why organizations like ISACA exist, et cetera. But the standards, a good set of standards is not specific to a unique scenario. They are principles that apply to many scenarios. And I believe that, despite a lot of the chaos in the world and values and social issues, we need to double down on maintaining a level of integrity and objectivity, because that's what's essential to what we're doing here. Where, it's that when we get too tied up with being political, well, that's when things slip and that's when breaches occur. I've worked with hundreds of companies over the last 25 years. I should probably calculate how many so I could give you an accurate number. And I've worked with some incredible leaders and incredible programs, and I've worked with some average, and I've worked with some terrible ones. And I can tell you that it always comes down to a leadership problem. When we come talk about culture integrity, it's leadership. When I've worked for people that have set the standards and made sure that everybody understood them and gave them the room to run within those standards, we accomplished incredible things. But when leaders were disingenuous or political or said one thing and did another, the culture of that organization ultimately broke down. And there were problems from an operational and effectiveness standpoint too. So I don't know if I'm answering a question, but I think that we need to continually maintain a high level of integrity and focus on upholding standards that are in alignment with the profession and not the politics of the organization we're serving.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We've covered a lot of ground here. I want to pivot here to focus in, and we talked a little bit about this, but let's dive a little bit deeper with hiring managers and organizations. So for years, we've seen reports of an enormous supply-demand imbalance, which sparked significant investments. There's a ton of programs out there, right? And on its face value, it defies logic why we're not seemingly making a bigger dent. Yet despite all of that, there appears to be large numbers of people who can't break into the field. And some of the questions that have come in have talked to this frustration. So, but between the reports of gatekeeping and candidates believing employers are not serious about hiring, the inability to capitalize on newly gained knowledge and skills does lead to atrophy, right? So have you observed any of this? And what advice do you have for people seeking their first or even like a second role?
Mm-hmm. it's frustrating to talk about this because, if we were talking about this 5 years ago, we'd be having a different conversation. And if we're talking about this in 2, 3 years from now, we're going to be having a different conversation. So let's keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of heartbreak out there right now. And, while I coach and advise people on how to write their resumes and how to interview and how to tell their story, a lot of what I do is really helping people reclaim their value, understand the assets they have, and know where they can go with them. And then we frame that out in the tools we use, right? But there are so many people out there that have such great potential that are stuck and stalled. And it's no fault of their own. It's just a matter of the fact that economics companies are not hiring right now. I feel like, there's to many degrees. My suspicion is that organizations are trying to meet certain metrics of profitability, and we're dealing with the largest expenses, headcount and salaries, and it's just being chopped. And it's kind of like, deal with it. There's a lot of I don't care, deal with it right now. So what can you do if you are trying to break in or transition in? One, continually to stay on your game and invest in yourself, develop the skills, and recognize that it's those who are going to be able to stay in the game are going to be the ones that catch the wave when the surf rises again. I'm terrible with metaphors. I'm going to mix them all up. But, I really feel like the image I see is a lot is that, we're getting on our surfboards and we're paddling out. The waves aren't there yet, but it's time to get out there because we've been in the bottom of a trough. Depending what I think interest rates do, obviously the political landscape has a lot to say. In the coming year, we're going to start climbing out of this. So it's for the people that are holding the line, investing in their skills, networking, and finding ways to solve valuable problems for others that will ultimately be there ready when things start to move again and the waves start breaking the way we want them to.
So do you have any specific recommendations for viewers regarding networking? What do you think is working better versus not for people? Is it just going on LinkedIn and throwing hey, I'm looking to connect or these cold calls, or is it actually something a lot bit more meaningful?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. I mean, the common way in the past was like, put it out there, network, connect, be a lion, whatever the case may be. But I don't really see that as the case. I think that we live in a world where, at least here in the United States, in the area that I'm in, profession aside, people are so burnt out from inauthentic, fake, superficial communication that there's a real hunger and response for authenticity, integrity, and really vulnerability. I can tell you that if you were to go to somebody and be like, hey, I see we share connections, do you have a job? Like, no, we're all burnt out. Like, we're all just trying to focus on the essential right now. I say all, but a lot of people are really trying hard to stay focused on what's important and tune out a lot of the noise. So when it comes to networking, the real trick is to find that legitimate thread between you and another person and be open to exploring it. I do a lot of informational conversations and calls with people that I find interesting that I come across. I'm sure I have something that they need, but it's really a matter of, hey, I see you doing this. I'm doing this. I'd love to have a conversation about that, and it's the thing that I feel is a kind of a superpower now in a world where we're all being bombarded is taking the time to look for the angles, to find the unique perspectives and things, or to ask the questions that are not always being asked. And I think one of the ways you can tease that out or you can develop that for yourself is it's kind of what I call the high ground exercise. And it's something I work with my coaching clients at all levels, especially at the senior levels. And that is to ask them, if you were going to give a TED Talk on the 3 most important, incontrovertible, can't take them away, you own them principles and your perspective on whatever it is you do, whether you do this job or that job, you look back and you say, what are the 3 most valuable lessons I've learned that nobody can take away? They ultimately become the high ground that you stand on. And from there, it allows you to start really building out, like, what are my values? What do I care about? If I can see this from this perspective that other people can, I'm really looking like, who else sees this? And I just think it comes down to, I just think, it's a lot bigger than that. We're at a time when we're looking for depth, authenticity, and connection. It's not a commodity. You don't get a lot of it. But if you take the time to really focus on people and your interest in finding ways to solve problems for others and yourself, that's how you create these connections that build relationships that will last years into your career. I've had so many conversations early on with people. We were just trying to shoot the shit and troubleshoot stuff and figure out what was going on. They're my friends and my clients 10, 15 years later, because we were both in there trying to find some common thread where we care about something that has value. So those are essential aspects of this field. And I think that any profession, if you want to really be somebody that has and delivers value.
Yeah, you wrapped up a lot of stuff and stuff that I've been personally working on too, because you get to that point where it is, regardless, I think we undervalue how much we crave connection. And we were never, like, if you look at the origins of people, like communities and whatnot, and then what's happened over time, and we live in this very individualized world, and in a lot of ways it is very superficial. So I think everything you had said there has a lot of value, regardless of even if you're not in this profession. Like, this is just good life advice at this moment in time, that's very much applicable. As we shift here, this is a question came in that I'm gonna touch on. I think we'll see. What are your thoughts on ageism within the cybersecurity job market?
It's a tricky question. It's one I kind of have my thoughts and feelers on. I don't think it's as strong of a bias as other industries, because if you're somebody who has a very strong track record, demonstrable success, value, you're somebody, there's a lot of more senior level, I call them, because I am one, a master's level professional, right? In the field, that are still tremendous contributors in driving value. That said, I think when we look at individual corporate cultures, there's more bias than we often realize. And man, I'm really spitballing here, so I can't validate this, but a lot of my gut and my anecdotal conversations are that when we entrust very early career people with functions like talent acquisition, where you're literally, you're impacting the success of the company, you're changing people's lives, people are making literal life decisions based on these opportunities, there's a lack of engagement or maturity in many cases. And it's not even personal. It's just that these people that I see, that I've developed, that are thrown in these roles, they have all this administrative responsibilities and pressure, and they tend to go with what's comfortable and familiar. So I think that there is bias for sure. I don't think that it's a systemic problem, but I think it really comes down to individual organizations and their internal culture and how they view things.
And more importantly, if to your point, like, there's a lot of this is anecdotal at this point, but the reality is we've got a lot of career changers that are coming in that are in adjacent fields.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue it's only going to increase across the globe as technology shapes every type of occupation out there. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that keeps me up at night is when you look at, we view the respondents to our survey largely view that respondents are not as qualified as they would like them to be, but there's some mismatches in job postings and requirements and stuff like that, which we kind of set aside because that's an organizational challenge more than anything. But then how do you build experience? Like, we need to be real careful. And this is kind of why I do like some of the conversations that are happening around AI and how we need to be very methodical about the impact across the globe. Because if you were to automate every lower level position, how the heck are we ever going to get people to build experience to fill the positions to be the checks and balances?
Yeah. Wow. There you go.
Right?
We cut our knees off because we have like hoverboards and we don't need to walk anymore.
Right.
What happens when the hoverboard breaks? Like, I don't know.
Right. Exactly.
Like, no, that's really interesting. I feel like I want to just start some organization where we just take all the people that are interested in like a works progress administration from the 30s or something.
Right.
Like, give people an opportunity to gain skills and do service in exchange for something. Like, I build people at all levels of the profession, but I have a 20-year-old and 17-year-old daughters, and I'm friends with a lot of younger people that are going into college and coming out, and I have tremendous empathy for them because I see so much desire and willfulness, but not a lot of opportunities. And it's cyclical. It shifts. We're in a bit of a tougher time now. But I do, the better leaders I've worked with made it part of their hiring plan to create succession development and to devote some headcount to early career people or, sub 5 years to essentially develop and upskill them. But it was always when we had the mission and the mandate to build out something, either solve a huge problem, whether it be a breach response or preparation for something. And it was those leaders that had also come up through different methods or ranks in many cases that recognize the value of people that aren't coming out of the assembly line, but might come from different areas of experience.
Right. Okay. So we're gonna shift here because we're running long on time here. I'm gonna try to get to some questions. But how are ISACA credentials like CISA and CISM differentiated and recognized compared to other industry certs?
Yeah. So certs, we talked about them a little earlier, but certs like CISM and CISA and others are valuable, especially when you reach a certain point and you're dedicated and you realize this is the path that I'm on. There's a couple of values from a pure headhunter perspective that demonstrate an investment in your career and an effort, and presumably you have a certain understanding or domain expertise or knowledge. So there's that. I especially think as you get into more management and leadership roles, but not exclusively, having certs like CISA, CISM, et cetera, they demonstrate a more strategic view of security and risk program management. So I believe that, if you really are going into management and leadership roles, from a perception standpoint, they're value, but I also believe the organizations provide a lot of value in content. And I've seen that evolve over the years, so that I think that CISA, CISM, et cetera, they have value and are seen as credible certifications, especially if you're in a role that requires a level of strategy and big picture thinking.
So I'm also going to tease you a little bit. So ISACA has been working on an analyst program that I've been personally invested in. It's been several years in the making, but we just wrapped up the beta. Matter of fact, the beta testing just closed this week. Oh. So our people, tuning in, it is expected for a Q1 release. Called Certified Cybersecurity Operations Analyst, or CCOA, right? Because we all have to have acronyms. I'm optimistic it is going to be a game changer. We look at it is a hybrid program, and it's not your typical hybrid program that a lot of people are seeing on the market, where it's just a couple exhibit-based things. Like there's actual practical hands-on, but ISACA had dealings with prior programs where we had a full-blown performance program, and the reality is, the hard point is the market didn't want that. The market wants an easy button, so this is really kind of, I view, is going to be a good middle ground to move forward and to demonstrate, really, for candidates to assess their knowledge in a lot of areas as well as their practical hands-on. So I'm super excited. That is targeted at 1 to 2 year experience, and I think hopefully it helps resolve some of that stuff that we see with those folks that are either transitioning out of, any kind of upskill and reskilling and university programs. So
I like hearing that, actually. That's interesting. I think that you guys are a highly established, valuable organization. Like ISACA has been around, and consistently the people that I've worked with, whether at regional chapter events or the mothership, have all been very dedicated and committed to really furthering the profession and developing professionals within the space. I haven't heard of what you're talking about before, but I like the concept of it because, I mentioned earlier, you can go down any road and see a billboard for a cyber boot camp somewhere. And a lot of times they're targeted into areas where the people don't have a lot of opportunity, economic resources. So I think that if there was a program that could take people that were entering the field and really give them a baseline set of skills, knowledge, understanding that was acknowledged, accepted by other people who understood what ISACA is about and the value of that program, it would be valuable. And not for nothing, just for the people that come out of those boot camps, they have, in many cases, they have an overview of knowledge, but they don't really understand the underlying aspects or the downstream ramifications. So anything to provide meaningful, valuable training and career support for early career people, and that meaningful being the operative word, is needed, and I think is a great idea.
Well, I love hearing that. So you hadn't heard much because we learned from the past, and the beta took a very deliberate approach on the beta because, like any tech-oriented program, like we wanted to let the debate, let the data drive that. So far, things are trending really favorable. I'm excited about this. More so probably with what you're talking about because it validates. Listen, at the end of the day, we talk about a lot of specialist type skills and whatnot, and we're increasingly moving towards a very vendor-specific landscape, right? Which is damning in a lot of ways because when you look at from whether you're a university or a training provider or a credentialing body, licensing of those products becomes a huge issue. And then you're tied to the vendor, and ISACA is vendor neutral. So we have always put a lot more emphasis on that. Open source is a big piece of that because open source is the basis by which vendors will build their front ends and whatnot. So all good stuff. Well, Jeff, listen, we're going to go through a couple of the questions here. And then I'm going to give you some parting thoughts here. So a question came up. I don't know if this one is more specific to government centric because I do know this happens, but can you speak on companies posting and interviewing multiple rounds for a role without securing the funding yet?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah, this does occur. They're called pipeline wrecks in many cases. And it's in some of the applicant tracking systems, the ATSs that companies use. It's a feature in them. And the idea is that we attract a pool of passive candidates. But what more often than not happens is people apply to these roles that need a job, that are serious, and ultimately it just becomes a black hole. Very frustrating. There's another thing going on too where it feels like there's analysis paralysis. I can't tell you the number of people I've spoken to over the last year, but especially in the last few months in my coaching practice that are going through 6, 7, 8 interviews, and in some cases being ghosted. I cannot tell you how angry that makes me. I feel as a professional in my field, ghosting is completely unacceptable. I get crushed on that when I bring it up in other forums and stuff. People think it's part of the way it is. But I believe that, these are the things that we are doing in the name of efficiency or whatever that are eroding the trust with people and are breaking down, the contract, the faith that it's, working in a company is a positive thing. It's almost, we don't have time left, but I could do a whole seminar on my thoughts on this subject about how to rehumanize the hiring practice and what needs to be done and what we as individuals and hiring managers can do. But to your point, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and a lot of BS going on, because companies are putting stuff out there, they're posting, they're interviewing, and ultimately they're not making decisions. It's almost like the purple squirrel mixed with a unicorn. They're looking for that perfect person. They don't exist, and they don't really care how many people's time they waste going through that process, because they don't often know what they want. And in the end of the day, I believe everybody gets hurt.
It does. When you talk about eroding trust, and we look at it from a human perspective, and a lot of emphasis, when you look at a term like ghosting, right? There's always it's in the interpersonal space, right? People be talking about it in the dating front, and so all of that, like the human psychology of this, you can't decouple, and I think is becoming increasingly important to our field for a multitude of reasons, not only from the talent acquisition side of it, but also to the impacts and how do you shape behavior? How do you of your employees within there to help be that first line of defense is in a number of other areas.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll just say a quick little experience really in my career. I was recruiting for a BISO. I had talked to a candidate. They had interviewed. They didn't interview well. They didn't get the job. And I didn't respond. I ghosted them. I was only a year and a half into the job. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to give bad news. A friend of mine said, hey, I'm on this listserv of CISOs, and this guy said you repped him and he interviewed with you and your company and you've blown him off. He's like, what? He's like, is that true? What's up? I know that's not who you are. And I can still feel the shame in my face when I heard that, right? I'm red right now.
Yeah.
And I faced the music and I called this guy and he said, look, I would love to hear good news, but I'm in security. So I get bad news all the time and I know what to do with that. But I can't do anything with no news. So if you're going to be a recruiter in this profession, do yourself and everyone a favor. Tell people like it is. They may not like the answer, but if you give people the respect and give them a final decision, they can move on. And I never forgot that. And I believe we all need to give each other that respect so that we can make decisions and get going.
Yeah, that's all good. For our viewers, boy, we've covered a lot of ground today, and a lot. I can't even begin to express, Jeff, how fruitful I believe this session is. As we get ready to wrap up here, what's your maybe a top practical tip for people, like to kind of wrap it all up of everything we've talked about up to this point? That applicants, whether they're active or passive or just getting started on their journey, can leverage moving forward.
All right. Well, this is a little bit on the soft skill side, but it's very powerful. I believe that, and I treat every candidate I work with, that we all need to see ourselves as the hero in our own story. And I'm talking about the hero's arc or the hero's journey. It's a classic tale, Joseph Campbell, but it usually starts with there's a call, there's a refusal, there's an acceptance. You get knocked down, you get up, you get your ass kicked, you get up, you keep struggling, you win. And in the end, you bring the elixir and the treasure back, right? So we all have to recognize in the arc of our lives and careers, we are that hero. And sometimes we're getting our ass kicked, but sometimes we're winning. And the more we see ourselves as this continuum, whereas we know that we are constantly evolving and that ultimately we have value and worth and we are here to solve problems and help others, the more we internalize and understand our own story, the better we are at telling it. And the better we can tell our own stories in a way that's authentic in alignment with who we are, the more real connection we're going to make with those people that are going to have huge influences on our lives. And I want everybody to start seeing themselves as the hero in their own story and know that even if they're struggling now, they will triumph in the long run.
Thank you so much, Jeff. What an amazing conversation today. I just saw a comment, right? Highest participation ever on a LinkedIn Live for us.
Thank you.
I was excited for this topic. Boy, we did not fall short. This conversation just flowed. Thank you so much for giving us your time and expertise.
Well, it was a privilege for me too, and thank you very much. And we got to stick together. This is we talk about technology, but it really comes down to the people. And I think it's time to reinvest more on that part of the equation.
Perfect. Thank you so much.